Thanks everyone for listening in. We're very excited today to give a little workshop about the play to earn and the gaming GameFi industry. We are speaking on behalf of Blockchain Founders Fund today at BlockPlay, and we have carved out a very interesting agenda to give a very detailed overview about what we see and how we see the space. And we also talk a little bit about Blockchain Founders Fund in itself, our thesis, and of course, our lovely portfolio companies. We're going to run you through, and of course, any questions you have, let us know at the event later or in the online portal where you can log in, ask questions, and meet us as well. So before we jump in and go into any details on the market, I want to talk a little bit and introduce to you guys what Blockchain Founders Fund is about and what our scope looks like within the GameFi and the play to earn industry. Blockchain Founders Fund has been around for 4 years. We are an early stage venture capital fund based out of Singapore, and we focus on the blockchain and the Web3 space. So we're not a pure gaming fund. That's something I want to give away. But we have done a lot of successful investments in the space and have grown companies from a pre-seed stage up to a unicorn space. Now, we look at basically 3 different buckets in general, which would be relevant down the road. So the first bucket we're very interested in is blockchain non-crypto, right? That's a space which sort of drove blockchain early on. It's typically the B2B side where we look at how blockchain can solve a problem. And it's typically also the core technology to solve a problem. The second part, what is quite interesting for us is a category we call anything that supplies the crypto industry, right? So we don't typically look at only layer 1s and layer 2s. It's more like how can we enable access to all the decentralized application, in this case, specifically games. Right now, the industry is still very fragmented and not a lot of people are using blockchain games. And there could be a lot more. We just need to figure out how can we enable access a lot better and a lot smoother. The third category we look at is basically crypto native. That's where today's topic falls in. We look at gaming, GameFi, DeFi, NFTs, and metaverses. Now, we are very, very early stage. We want to find companies before they become interesting, before they become hyped, and before they reach a trend. And that's exactly what we have been doing in the space. In 2018, we did a first investment in the blockchain gaming space. That was a very interesting move because the term essentially play to earn wasn't even existing. People were not talking about blockchain and gaming. People were talking about finance and blockchain because that's where they were thinking the majority of the adoption is coming from. Fast forward to today, blockchain and gaming has been a massive adoption driver, and a lot of unicorns have developed. Now, Mansoor is going to talk a little bit about some of the interesting portfolio companies we have at Blockchain Founders Fund. And please, Mansoor, highlight Splinterlands, Moonray, ASM, and all the other star companies we have.
Yeah, absolutely. So as Toby mentioned, and thank you, Toby, for that fantastic introduction. As Toby mentioned, like in 2018, we invested in a play-to-earn gaming company called Splinterlands, which has essentially grown to become one of the top games in the industry. They're typically doing about 400,000 daily active users, and now it's become a unicorn. So they're a play-to-earn NFT card game, which has got a tremendous fan base and engaged community. And they're one that we came in essentially at a pre-seed round and works very closely with the company throughout their journey to help them grow and scale. But we've also invested in a number of other gaming related companies. And so one of them is Moonray, which has been a company that's had a tremendous amount of buzz recently, building a tier 1 game for like a AAA game for the blockchain crypto industry, where all of the assets within the game are NFTs and that sort of thing. Another one we invested in is called Dogami. So they're building the petaverse instead of the metaverse. And so it's a game where you collect dogs. So it's, for a lot of dog owners, pet owners, or participants in this ecosystem, but you collect and own dogs, you train dogs, you breed dogs, and you compete with them in various different games. Another one is ASM. So again, another early investment, which a number of investors such as Coinbase, Delphi, Sixth Man also participated in. And what they're doing is they're putting AI into NFTs to essentially create brains. And so these brains have applications not just in the gaming space, but a number of other spaces such as finance. But in the gaming space, one of the things that's very interesting in how they're being used is to essentially allow NPC characters to mirror human-like strategies. And so that way they become less predictable and can have a more holistic strategy in terms of gameplay and becomes more engaging for the fans. I think another interesting use for the brains is essentially allowing people to, control multiple characters through AI. So this is another way that they've kind of started to make some inroads within the gaming space, start signing with a number of games and clients in integrating this technology. I'll push it back to Toby and ask him if there's any others that he wanted to touch on as well.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mansoor, for giving us a rundown on sort of our portfolio companies. One thing I want to highlight though here is a very, very important factor, right? I'm going to take Splinterlands as one of the core examples here because they've been around for very long and they have a pretty established game as of now. But even when we found Splinterlands, and Mansoor was the one who actually sourced the company, so congrats on that. Splinterlands had always been very product focused, right? They had a different strategy. Maybe the community wasn't that strong in the beginning, and maybe they didn't have as many users, but they had a playable game. And that's essentially the core of any game. People need to be able to play the game, and they need to be able to understand the game, like the game, and almost become addicted to the game, right? And if you look at the non-blockchain gaming space, that is an extremely important factor. We have good relationships with other game studios such as Ubisoft or EA, and it takes them a couple of years to develop a proper game. It might be a little bit slower on the casual game side, but if they want to build AAA games, it is essentially a very long development process and also a very sophisticated development process. And I think that's a very critical understanding point, because a lot of startups, and we come across so many gaming companies on a day-to-day deal flow basis, and all of them are trying to build either casual games or AAA games and layer a blockchain component to it so people actually earn while they're playing. Now, as we have seen, a lot of gaming companies in the space, they didn't actually build the product first, but they built a community first, and then they were launching and dropping NFTs to the community to generate revenue. That, in our opinion, is a bit of a challenge because it doesn't actually indicate when the game will be playable. And in some of the AAA game companies we have been sourcing, we have been analyzing, a proper playable game version is 3, 5, maybe even 10 years down the road. And now you as an investor have to decide if that company is able to keep the community alive, keep the community interested over that development cycle. And more importantly, is once the game is launched, the community has a very interesting expectation of the game, right? They want to know certain features because, trailers, pictures, videos, the company has been releasing over time, builds up a strong expectation layer. Now, if the game company, if the game when it's launched is challenged by bugs, isn't living up the expectations, the community is going to vanish. Now, that is, of course, a very different investment thesis than we have. We're looking for very product-focused games. We're looking for games where we can help them drive and get them a community and get them users, and not the other way around. So these are a lot of challenges in the space, and Mansoor is going to touch on a couple more challenges in the space. But what made the success in all of the games Mansoor mentioned is that they went the opposite way, right? They always had a product or a very, very short development cycle to actually launching the product, which then gave us the opportunity to be more hands-on, be more helpful on driving users, driving adoption, and making the game sticky and interesting. Because in my opinion, and I'm pretty sure Mansoor agrees, is that no blockchain game or no token layer by itself will make a game successful. If a game is boring, not entertaining, and not sticky, users will eventually go to a different game and play that game because it shouldn't become a job. If we go a little deeper, I even think the term play to earn is flawed, right? Because you don't want to play a game to earn, you want to play a game and earn. So in my opinion, the term should be even play and earn compared to play to earn, because that's essentially what games are built for. games are to make our life exciting, to make our leisure time exciting, and people are playing it because they love it and it keeps them entertained, and not predominantly because they want to earn for it, because then it becomes like a job. And that's what's been happening previously in a play to earn industry, that, for example, in the Philippines and other emerging markets, companies have been formed to only play games because they generate return, and maybe even more return than they would by launching other businesses in a similar space. Now, that's, I think, a very important factor to understand. And then from an investor angle, it's more like, are you interested in short-term, more token exposure where it can be driven by community and market conditions? Or are you looking to back very sustainable games or game studios, which are product first and here for the long term? Nothing is wrong. It's just a different strategy and a different mentality. But maybe Mansoor, talk a little bit about what are the challenges in terms of backward building and unsustainable ecosystems in the space?
Yeah, so I think, like, and Toby's began to mention some of the points around community, but one of them is that a lot of games are essentially being built, backwards, in that there's the focus on the community first, and there's no building of the product, right? And so it's like build a huge Discord, drop some NFTs, but there's no utility for the NFTs. There's no game or product to engage the community. And typically a community around, if you look at any of the biggest game titles out there today, typically the community is built through engagement and passion for the game. And in this case, it's essentially the community is built around passion for, essentially, in most cases, flipping the assets. And so it isn't really sustainable. It isn't really an indication that there's actually players that want to play the game. So I think that's like the first, red flag. And that doesn't mean that I'm saying having an early community that's following your development journey is a bad thing. I just mean in terms of prioritization of what, like, the initial, goals are. And then the second part is around, like, unsustainable ecosystems, right? And as Toby mentioned, like, adding a token to a game doesn't necessarily mean that now, because people can potentially earn, that they're more likely to play it, right? And so high yields, if they're not coming from some method of the company earning or generating income, are essentially a bribe to participate in the ecosystem, which is just deferring a selling decision, right? And so eventually, like, that downward pressure is going to happen to the token. And we've seen kind of this happen, outside of the gaming space and also within the gaming space, with tokens essentially, crashing from high yields that were offered that essentially drain resources. And so it's a poor economic design. I think then one of the other issues right now with GameFi is a little bit of negative sentiment around GameFi industry, especially with, like, play to earn and token earning systems, because the mechanisms haven't really worked, right? The amount you earn fluctuates, obviously, one, based on the market, but then two, if the economics work out right, there's less developed countries where, the earning is different from more developed countries, where you'll get, more traction and game players, and it essentially also brings down the yields, that sort of thing. So I think the economics is one of the things that really need to be worked on, and that's, like, at the forefront of the industry. So I don't know if there's clear examples of what a great token economy for a game looks like yet. There's a lot of different models being tested, and we'll see, like, I think throughout this bear market, companies emerge with stronger, token in-game economics that do grow, that have games that, engage players for the gameplay. And then the earning component is essentially something that makes the in-game economy and the earning potential much more attractive. I think then one of the next challenges when it comes to building a game, it really comes down to the team, right? And it's not going to be the founder that builds a great game. It's the team that the founder puts around him. And so there is this question that I ask is around, as a founder, how are you going to convince, these other top game developers that are better than you in a number of other skill sets when it comes to the development and production of the game, to essentially, join you on this mission to build this game? And a lot of times that means having to convince someone to move from a high-paying job at a top studio to work at essentially a startup, right? And so there is this ability to like buy into the vision, get people on board from a building perspective, and that's often a tough sell. So that's definitely an important question, I think, from our side when we're evaluating a deal to consider. And I guess I'll throw it back to Toby. Do you have anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think thanks so much for the summary. I think you touched on a couple of success factors. We look at blockchain founders fund quite in detail, and just to give all of you a bit of an idea, right? We look at about 500 deals per month, and of course, some of them are gaming companies or GameFi companies. But we have a very strict process of understanding if that company is relevant, right? So we look at an average about 90 points across a full DD of why we think this company is interesting, right? And founders, as Mansoor mentioned, is a very, very crucial factor. We typically want to see founders with a very strong domain expertise, right? Previous exits, previous successes, and understanding why the previous experience, if it's not, for example, in gaming, would be relevant to build a game company. So if any one of you guys are out there building a game company, ask yourself, what skill sets do I cover and what skill sets do I need to have within my company to build a successful game, right? And of course, a very strong CTO with effectively or hopefully a strong game experience from a leading studio, from other startups who have been successful is definitely a very convincing factor. On the other side, we look at the product quite intensely, right? I mean, I like to play games before I invest them. That's of course only possible if there's a playable version or at least a beta version out there. But even if you don't have that at the moment, try to give your investors something they can see the UI UX, and don't just tell them, oh, this is going to be our trailer, this is the game, how the game is going to look like. There's typically been big differences between the trailer and the actual playable game, and you don't want to overpromise and then underdeliver. For us, the market, of course, is very important. I think the GameFi market is still increasing, although, of course, it's been challenged by the bear market. But understanding and showing that you understand the market by putting the relevant assumption into potential models or into potential market sizing efforts within your deck or within your pitches is, I think, very, very important. On the token, which is then more specifically relevant for a play to earn company, understand what is the utility of the token, right? Are people just going to buy it and sell it as soon as the token price go up, or can they actually do something with it? That's like all the points Mansoor touched before. Make sure you have strong economics, look for advisors who have been doing this in the past. And of course, we as a fund also support our companies on a day-to-day basis with all these challenges, because we try to be extremely hands-on, as we've seen so many different token economics and models before. So we now have a pretty good understanding of what needs to happen in order to make a game from a token perspective successful. So anyone is out there who is currently building something interesting, always feel free to reach out. You can find us on our socials. And we're more than happy to give advice, support throughout the process. Even if it's early, like we like to be early, we like to support even before products, but we need to have a very strong trajectory to have a product being launched very soon. I think another quick thought I want to add in, because we have sort of discussing about this internally quite a bit, is the idea of investing or building games versus game studios. Right? We invested in an interesting company for a couple months ago, which is called Future Trash. Right? Future Trash is essentially a game studio in a blockchain space. So the idea is, rather than betting on one single game to succeed, you invest you bet on a game studio with multiple games to succeed. And that's also how the traditional market's been looked like, right? You have very, very few times you have one single game which becomes successful. It typically belongs to a gaming studio. And then that also led to the fact that, you know, the game market is basically dominated by 4, 5, 6 game studios across the world. One of them being Tencent, Ubisoft, EA, and some others. Now, as an investor, you need to ask a question: are you willing to take that risk and bet on one single game? Then obviously you need to have a very strong diligence of why this game has all the success factors you think needs to happen in order to build it. Or do you want to build on a game studio essentially of driving value across multiple games and taking communities across multiple games, and potentially even have some cross factors and synergies between your games? But maybe Mansoor, you want to quickly add on to that.
Yeah, I mean, at the initial phases, right, like any early game studio, they do have to launch with one game and make that game successful for it essentially to morph into a game studio. But the difference is from a DD perspective, it's more around the founder, the team, their ability to build a game, launch that game, and essentially grow a user base and community around it and players, and understanding that every game, no matter how successful, has a life cycle, and they need to essentially push out another game and engage those users with the next product, right? They've already built a user base, the community, and you need to move them over to like the next product, the next game, at some point in time, right? And so that's kind of the thinking behind it, that this team, will stay together. They'll be able to push out like the games, and then understand that they're going to need to, work on developing whatever that next property is.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think that's been really helpful, Mansoor. I want to quickly jump in on future landscape and market. So we are definitely very interested in gaming still, right? Of course, now with the bear market, a lot of investors have decided to hold off on investing or being a lot more careful. And our stage is the opposite. We are deploying, as always, in early companies with strong founders and interesting products. So I think now is the time to invest, right? Now valuations are normalizing. All the builders which are there to really make an impact are gonna be left over, because these are the ones which have the drive and the walkthrough to sustain such a market. I think it is extremely important for founders right now to look out for liquidity, as the bear market could be extended, could go on for 1.5 years or longer. So like make sure you have enough money in the bank to sustain your burn rate and have a runway of, I would say, at least 18 months. And if not, try to make sure that you can cut costs and focus on building while going through that bear market. Token raises have been challenged. That's what we also see in our very close network, that a lot of investors are more focused on equity investments right now rather than supporting token projects, which I'm not saying that it's not possible. It's just going to be a bit more difficult sell. And I think here, again, the sustainability in the product side needs to be emphasized in order to convince that you have something ready where people can play around and you're not building on community and more hype related items. So I think that the market is here to stay. I also do think that blockchain gaming will bring a lot more mainstream into this space, just because it is something which has been very crucial and a lot of people want to use. And it definitely, on a core principle, having gaming and earning in one, and essentially owning assets within games due to the NFT layer, is something which is extremely crucial for the industry, right? Even in the non-blockchain gaming space, a lot of people are investing in games, buying assets, buying skins, but they're not actually owning them, right? So blockchain and gaming solves a fundamental problem and challenge within the industry. So we are very excited to support games moving forward, or game studios. Again, it's just more about like properly evaluating those projects and finding founders who burn and thrive for their project. Maybe Mansoor, you want to add on?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think like one of the things that we've seen obviously is like a saturation of games, right? Like in 2018 and 19, there weren't very many games being built or launched. And now there's hundreds of games, right? And one of the most common is, after the success of a few NFT card games, like a saturation in the market, right? Like millions of people launch an NFT card game. And so like that in itself isn't as interesting anymore, right? And so it's now like I think the building is shifted toward games with better quality graphics as an example, or something unique in terms of value proposition to make it stand out. I think other areas that we're looking at that I think are really interesting, as opposed to just betting on an individual game, is stuff that makes the entire GameFi industry more interesting from an overall perspective, right? And so things like gaming or GameFi analytics companies, guild management products, so that guilds can participate in different games, manage the different players, that sort of thing. NFT game asset lending and liquidity. I think again, like this is something for guilds, but also individual players, that it makes certain games more accessible. Cross-chain integration, the ease of onboarding and gameplay, right? So another challenge with a lot of NFT games is that in many cases they require hundreds or $1,000 like upfront to even get started before you can even play the game. And this essentially, you know, limits the entire market size of the game, you know, by a lot, right? It's not that everyone has $100 or $1,000 just sitting around to start playing a game for the first time. So all these types of things that can make it more accessible and finding new models essentially for people to engage new players and grow the game and the game community. So these are some of the things that we're looking at. Toby, do you have others you want to add to it?
Yeah, we're also very interested, and it's probably like a food for thought for everyone out there in the space, is what other projects fall in the gaming or GameFi category to essentially supply and support games, right? There's things like asset management where games, right? There's like a bunch of different things which might be necessary, maybe not right now, but maybe down the road. So how can you as a startup not create another game, but how can you maybe offer a service or a product where you can supply and support a lot of different games down the road, right? Where you have a lot bigger multiple, maybe even a bigger market, and you can work with potentially all the games. Guilds was of course one part, which was also very exciting, but it kind of falls into this challenge what Mansoor mentioned from a tokenomics perspective in the first place. And also there's been a lot of guilds across Southeast Asia, India, where we actually invested in an interesting guild called IndieGG, had strong backers such as Sequoia, Lightspeed, Polygon, and YGG. And we think the Indian guild market at this example is a very interesting one because it has 400 million players, right? And it hasn't been fully penetrated by the space yet. So there's a bunch of different things how you can differentiate yourself. You either build a game, you build a game studio, you focus on one particular market which hasn't been fully penetrated yet, or you create a service company which then essentially supplies a lot of different games or game studios moving forward, which then decreases your risk essentially as well, because we do think and we do believe that the gaming or play to earn or play and earn space will sustain moving forward. I want to quickly talk about Blockchain Founders Fund just to round it up. Because we already been talking for about 25 minutes. So yeah, Blockchain Founders Fund, like I said, we are still very excited to deploy in such more challenging markets. We are early stage, right? We typically write a check of up to 200K on a first investment, and then we do like to follow on and support companies down the road across multiple funding rounds to keep them well capitalized. Our largest check we can write is about $5 million US. We are trying to be very, very hands-on with our companies and have scaled multiple companies from pre-seed to unicorn status across the space, not just gaming. And we have a very strong team across New York City and Singapore who brings a lot of expertise in helping, sort of navigating you through early challenges and avoid pitfalls. I think for us, it was always very, very important. And that's kind of like the Web3 mindset we have, I think, is to build a strong community around the fund. Right, with including 145 portfolio companies, including 330 mentors and experts who can tap into their expertise and knowledge as well, and a very strong LP base, which covers strategic investors across family offices, across smart contract auditors, across exchanges, across liquidity providers or market makers, gives you a very competitive edge in starting your business all around the world. So as a last thought from mine, and I give it to Mansoor for a last thought, is I'm very, very excited to be at that event. Thanks so much for the opportunity. I hope to connect with a lot of founders, investors, ecosystem players out there. And we will be present at the event venue in Singapore tonight for anyone who wants to have a chat, wants to connect, always open. Please reach out on LinkedIn or email, and we're always happy to support and provide capital for amazing startups within the blockchain and the Web3 space. Mansoor, up to you.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for listening in, everybody, to our presentation. And please, 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 if you see us at the event, at the conference, at the venue, come say hi. Tell us about what you're building. We'd love to get to know you and collaborate. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.